Well, happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Ed Ramsey from DePaul's Corporate and Strategic Partnership team, and we are really happy to present to you using AI for operational efficiency and employee empowerment by Dr. Lamont Black. Thank you for joining us today. Now, as we wait for people to join us, log in, what have you, we're just going to go around the horn. If you can just go into the chat and tell us what company you work for, what you do for the company, and what part of the world you are zooming in from. So let's see where everybody's coming from. Let's check out in the chat. Everybody, let's go. Huntington Bank in Ohio. Yes. Hub International, Northern California. Hello. Atlanta, CMO. Got somebody from Chicago. Wow, they're coming in. R. Donnelly in Iowa, Chicago Hub. Let's see, BMO, Harris, welcome. Schaumburg, Walgreens. Let's see, we have R. Donnelly in Virginia. More Molson Coors in Milwaukee, India. Walgreens, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Let's see, Blue Federal Credit Union in Pittsburgh. Wow. MSL in Chicago. We got someone from Milwaukee saying go Brewers. I'll also say go Brewers as well. Ryan from Walgreens in Overland Park, Kansas. Thank you for joining us as well. And someone from JLL. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We love when people join us for these webinars. So, I'm going to go through a couple housekeeping items before we begin. This session will be recorded. It's currently recorded right now. The recording will be made available on the DePaul AI Institute site, and we will share this link in our post-event email. And also toward the end of the session, we will provide a poll for you to provide feedback. All right. So, before we begin today's presentation, we want to make sure that you are aware of some of the great benefits that are available to you through our educational partnership within your organization. Many of you have expressed interest in learning more about DePaul's academic programs when you registered for today's session, and you can check out our educational benefits resource webpage by going ahead and scanning that QR code that you see that's in front of you on your phone to access our corporate partner website. It's a really, really, really great resource for you to learn more about DePaul's educational benefits for employees. It's also designed to be a resource guide for managers and leaders who are looking for workforce solutions. And our team will also drop the link into the chat if you'd like to bookmark it. So definitely get on that page. Now, also as an employee, you have access to educational benefits to help you grow, gain new skills, and advance your career. We want to make sure that you always think about DePaul to help you reach these goals. Our goal is to help you advance your skills and experiences so you can grow within your careers. And also to, you know what, you may have a desire to go back to school, or your team members may want to learn new skills for career advancement. DePaul can help you get there through our educational benefits, and we'd be happy to support you in any way. The ways we do that is that we have countless opportunities and programs regarding classes and certificates to full degree, actually degree programs at the graduate and undergraduate level, and we're now recruiting for fall classes this coming September. And just going to give you a survey of some of the programs we have. Really exciting. This fall, we'll be starting our new online MBA program, which is really a great benefit for our corporate partners. And as you can see, there are some great features of the program. For instance, we have a new curriculum with fewer classes, classes that will meet 2 nights a week in a synchronous format. And the program can be completed within 21 months. How about that, huh? So when you apply, all you have to do are 2 simple things. Provide us your resume and your transcripts. That's it. And what's also really great about this opportunity is that you qualify for a 25% discount for the MBA program, and you can visit our partner events webpage and register to attend our next MBA info session if you are interested in learning more about this graduate degree opportunity. Also, as a DePaul University corporate partner, You can also take advantage of our MA in Professional Communications program. It's a one-year accelerated online degree program for individuals interested in deepening their communication skills and expanding their network with other communication professionals in the industry. And then finally, we want to also spotlight our undergraduate BA degree completion program offered through our School of Continuing and Professional Studies. This is a 100% online program that is designed for those that obviously are working busy schedules, professionals that want to go back to school and are learning or actually looking for a program with flexibility to get their undergraduate degree. You can definitely transfer any of your credits from other universities and community colleges that you've attended, and you can even get credit for life experiences, as well as some internal corporate training that you might be having at your companies to further reduce the cost. What's also great about this program is that this program is actually reduced by discounted and reduced by 30% compared to the other standard undergraduate degree tuition rates. And you can also find out about our new info session, our next info session, in our partners events page. So we got something really exciting coming up next month. We want you to join us for a special webinar, Gen AI Powered Analytics, Driving Business Decisions, presented by Sina Ansari and Khadija Ali Valkil, directors of DePaul's Master of Science in Business Analytics programs at the Driehaus College of Business. Now, Drs. Ansari and Vakil will provide valuable information for leaders to follow a framework for developing a solid and mission-centric approach to AI adoption within an organization. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Lamont Black. Dr. Black is director of the Doctorate in Business Administration program and academic director of the Keeley Center for Financial Services. He is also an associate professor at the Department of Finance and Real Estate in the Driehaus College of Business at DePaul University. Now, Dr. Black is a wonderful thought leader in emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, blockchain, and the metaverse. Dr. Black is also really often asked to speak at conference keynotes, strategy sessions, and media outlets to discuss the impact of technology on business strategies. And one thing we ask you to do is that Dr. Black is featured in the 2023 crypto documentary, The Highest of Stakes, and is now available on Prime and Apple TV. So definitely check it out. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lamont Black.
All right, thank you, Ed, and thank you to everyone for joining. I'm Lamont Black, and I'll be guiding you through this discussion of AI and organizations today on this Wednesday. Let me go ahead and pull that up over here. So what we're going to be doing today is talking about AI adoption for organizations. This is part of this broader AI series here at DePaul. As Ed said, I'm in the business school, the finance department, and so I come at this from the perspective, in particular, of financial services. I work with a number of credit unions and banks on AI adoption, and so I feel like I've learned a lot out in the field about how this is being applied. I'll also share some thoughts of kind of how I view this as a very transformative moment for our economy and really for our global civilization. This is an important, I think, transition as we think about entering the age of AI. So I hope that you're here to learn, as I'm sure you are, and also to think about what this might mean for your organizations. So as you can see here, I'm primarily affiliated with DePaul University. That's my home here in Chicago. I'm also a fellow for the Filene Research Institute, which is a think tank for the credit union industry. My center is called the Credit Union of the Future. And then my private company, Wide Open Ventures, we do a lot of speaking and consulting work with financial organizations around these topics. So if you're interested in connecting or learning more, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find there. I would encourage you to reach out and connect, send me a message. You can also find me either on the DePaul website or my personal website, lamontblack.com. All right, with that, let's jump in. So, first question, just why AI? Why is DePaul doing this series on AI? Why an AI Institute? I think all of us would agree that this is an incredibly important topic. And part of what I want us to think about is why are we at a tipping point today? And where did this come from? How did we get here? And then I want every organization to be thinking about what are the implications for you going forward, whether that's operations or employees or customer facing. That's a big part of what I'm going to be talking about today. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. My goal is to address some of those towards the end. So I'd love to get any feedback you have on the things that I'm putting out here. So as you think about generative AI, which Ed mentioned as one of the upcoming sessions, I think everybody is familiar with ChatGPT, put out there by OpenAI in November of 2022. That, I think, was a tipping point in the public awareness of AI. As I'm going to share, AI has been around for a long time. I mean, we're talking like 70 plus years, but it was really just in these last few years that this became a topic of conversation around the dinner table, people starting to talk about with their friends and neighbors. And I think it's really these apps that you can now put on your phone and are so easy to use. ChatGPT was the fastest growing app in the history of the App Store. And what I'm showing here on this slide is just a quick sense of how quickly this has developed. These other tools, Microsoft Copilot, Anthropic Claude, Meta Llama, Google Gemini, and the list goes on with Grok and DeepSeek. And there's really now just a proliferation of these different tools out there. And I think for me, what makes this so important is this is user-facing interactive AI. Part of what I'm going to argue is that prior to these tools, AI was more of a back office application, machine learning, modeling, something that only a handful of people in organizations were really familiar with. This is something that is really user facing. And so whether you're talking about employees or customers, how do these tools start to change the way that we do work and the way that we serve our customers across the organization? So I think we're now aware that we are living through this transformation. But then as you think about what does this mean for individuals, I would say likely for many of you personally, just starting to get creative with what can you generate with generative AI. So what you'll see here is just in these next few slides, some of the things that I do with like boards of directors for financial institutions, just getting them more comfortable with these tools so that they can then become familiar with them, a little bit more educated about them, and then getting them to think about what are some of the potential applications across an organization. I find that most people still tend to think of generative AI as it relates to writing. That is something that I think many of us have probably done with like a ChatGPT, whether that's writing a recipe or a travel plan, or maybe it's email or some other types of documents. So writing is super useful. I think, there is still this tension, for instance, within higher education around whether AI is appropriate as a tool. This is a debate that we still have within DePaul University of when should students be using AI? When should students not be using AI? There was an article in The Atlantic shortly after the release of ChatGPT titled "The Death of the College Essay." So if you think about like a liberal arts course and writing essays, obviously this is now something that many students are thinking about. But my talking point is like, instead of viewing this as a crutch or a form of cheating, how do we start getting people thinking about this as a tool that can empower their own abilities, using it as a first draft, or maybe you do the writing and then it helps you with some of the editing. So there's just a lot of, I think, business use cases that people are now thinking about with writing. But it's helpful to acknowledge that these tools are evolving. Now we have generative AI that can produce images. When you think about even something like video, and you think about being able to, generate a video using AI, I'm sorry for the bandwidth. There's a little bit of lag on this one, but if you think about this was something we did for a conference I spoke at in Hawaii. There was no camera there, but before we went, we just used a prompt of like create a video of a conference in Hawaii, and it was able to produce this in a matter of seconds. And so with VO3 coming out of Google and more of these video applications of AI, I think we're going to see more of this in the media we consume. We're going to see more of this in the content that organizations produce. And for some people, it can be very frightening. This is where you get into conversations about like deep fakes and how do we even know what's true and what's not true anymore. But for me, this is a creative opportunity to really think about how do we start to generate more and newer content using these types of tools. So when people hear about AI, they are typically curious about it. But then if you start talking about AI as it relates to your organization, I am also a big believer of we have to start going through some internal communication, some internal marketing to assess how do people feel about AI. And it is just as much about people as it is technology. And it's really thinking about how do we kind of wrap our heads around this emerging trend and what does this mean for me? And what I find is that there is really often this sense of AI is cool and interesting, but can also be a little bit menacing. So this is kind of just a fun example of producing like, what would it look like to introduce AI into a bank branch? And you get this image that resonates with this idea of Terminator from the 1980s. You can put a friendly smile on a robot, but it's still going to feel cold and menacing and very arm's length. And for many regional and community financial institutions, this is the exact opposite of what they're going for. And so if you start talking about AI at an organization, then you have to ask like, well, is this on brand? Is this aligned with our mission and our vision? And what I find in working with executives and directors is that there's often a mix of this emotional spectrum ranging from excitement all the way to fear. People are very excited about the opportunities of using these new tools. But the fear could be things like cybersecurity, of getting hacked by AI, like I mentioned with deepfakes. How do we do customer identification in this world where all of this can be replicated? But then you think about also just like employees. What does this mean for my job? How is this going to change my job? Is this potentially going to replace me? And so throughout the organization, all the way from the board down to the entry-level employee, you're always going to have this dynamic. And you have to get this out on the table and talk about it, because if you make assumptions about how people feel, what I find is that you will often get it wrong, and I think assume a little bit too much. We sometimes do listening sessions throughout an organization, going department by department, and every session has a different dynamic. Some teams are excited, some teams are more anxious. And I view much of this as how do we start to shift the conversation to the left? How do we start to address the fear, but get people more excited? Part of that is managing risk. So whether that's cyber risk or implementation risk or risk of job replacement, we have to be able to help people know that we're going to try and mitigate those risks so then we can explore the opportunities. So I think we would all agree that AI is here. This is very much the world that we now live in. But just a little bit more motivation, if I may. Think about that history of AI going back to the 1950s. The term is often associated with the Dartmouth Conference as a birthplace of AI. And so if you think about 1956, that's now 70 years ago. And we are now living in a world where AI is part of our lives and AI is in our business. And what I have found over the last few years is when I would ask an audience like, hey, is anybody using ChatGPT? Just about, all the hands go up. And then I say, what are some examples of how you're using it? 9 times out of 10, a year ago, it would have been personal examples. things I'm using to help me manage my personal life. Now, more and more, they are business examples of how I am using it at work. And so something that is still a little bit uncertain as to whether I am allowed to use AI or whether AI has a little bit of stigma, like I'm using it as a shortcut. We have to be thinking about how does this intersect with the organization, so then we can really think about organizational transformation. And that's where I think this idea of the age of AI is so important. So if you think about all the phases that we have gone through over the different centuries of our global civilization, some people even use the analogy of the invention of fire. Maybe that's a little extreme, but if you think about like the Industrial Revolution, that was a transformative moment that changed the way we get work done. We went from an agrarian society to an urban society. And then if you think about the information age that goes back to like the 1980s, the personal computer, the internet, the smartphone, for those of us who are old enough, we lived through each of those. For those of you who are younger, you were born into this world where the internet already existed. For me, when I think about my kids, my grandkids, I think this is going to be the tipping point that really shapes their generation. And that's where I think I'm excited as a Gen X of how do I get to participate, even as a 50-year-old, in this massive change that I think has so much potential. So why is this important? I think employees are aware of AI. They're starting to talk about it. Many of them are starting to use it. I think customers are aware of AI. When you think about going online, whether that's through Netflix or Spotify, maybe you're shopping through Amazon, all of these are now AI empowered. And so as the customer experience becomes more of an AI experience and we get that personalization, organizations that are not adapting, I think customers are going to feel that gap even more because things that you could have gotten away with, kind of a one-size-fits-all approach 5 to 10 years ago, I think now with personalization, they are going to feel that one-size-fits-all approach even more, and they're going to go elsewhere to find services that are more tailored. And so it really is, I think, a competitive necessity for different organizations to figure out how to apply this technology. Two final points on the motivation. I like to share this picture. This is not a picture from the internet. This is a picture I took at DePaul University in a box right outside my office. So DePaul University is going through this process of getting rid of office phones. If you call me on my office number now, it's going to come through my laptop on Microsoft Teams. When I look at this picture, there's a sense of like the past. Think about those cords, this idea of an object that sits on my desk that I use to communicate with other people. But it also gives me almost a sense of vertigo of like, this is something that is a moment in time that will no longer exist in the future. Again, when I think about my teenagers graduating college and then starting their first job, they will not know a world with office phones. And just think about that. Think about how much things are changing in our lifetimes as we look backward to the past. And then if you look forward to the future, here's another picture of our family trip over spring break to San Francisco. And then if you think about the evolution of what many of you probably know, this is like a self-driving car. This is one of Waymo's self-driving taxis in San Francisco. They are now ubiquitous. You see these every 2 or 3 minutes. What seems very new and unusual and a little bit foreign quickly becomes very familiar. I was with my family. We decided to go back to the hotel, and I turned to them and I said, hey, we should take one of these things. My wife wanted nothing to do with it, but my 3 kids agreed to get in one. This is my daughter. She was very reluctant at first, but she gradually started to get comfortable. My 2 sons, they were all about it. And it was all like, Dad, when is this coming to Chicago? Dad, when are people going to have these in their own driveways? It's just a good indication of how much the world is changing and how change is accelerating. This is not linear change, it's exponential. So I think this is just kind of a visualization of where AI is going to really impact our lives even more. One final thing before I get into the more kind of internal organizational applications. As I mentioned, I spend a lot of time with organizations around boards and strategic planning, board education around artificial intelligence. And one of the questions I've started asking is, should leaders and boards be talking about AI? Because there are some organizations who still view AI as just a form of technology, and they would say, well, why do we need to involve our board? This is just operational execution, or we have like a risk policy or something like that. But I believe that if you agree that we are living through this transformative moment, boards need to be part of that conversation, not just being updated on different AI initiatives, but being part of the conversation about why are we doing this? Where are we going with this? How are we governing the operationalization of this so that they have a voice in this transformation? Because if you think about Blockbuster being disrupted by Netflix, when you think about Kodak being disrupted by digital film, these were massive technological changes that those organizations were not prepared for. And I think we need boards to be thinking more intentionally about how these organizations can adapt. All right, so in this second half, what I really want to do is focus on this idea of like, how do you develop an AI roadmap, and how do organizations really chart out a course for AI adoption? Because we can talk about different tools, and those tools are very powerful, but you don't want to get into a situation where you're just picking and choosing different tools that are out there on the market. I want organizations to be thinking about this more holistically. And as I said, this is not just technology, it's not just software, it's not just the IT department. 9 times out of 10, when I interact with an organization and they invite my team in to help them on this AI journey, our point of contact is someone like a chief technology officer or a chief information officer, because the assumption is, well, this is technology, that's where this should start. The problem is sometimes those people are in a role where they're trying to push the technology across the organization. They're trying to convince other people about why they should use it, or they are trying to look for use cases in other parts of the organization. This is much bigger than technology. I view it as organizational change. And so you need organizational change management to really figure out how to do AI adoption well. So 2 categories that we often use to think about how to structure this adoption journey. One would be internal, all those AI use cases that are going to change the future of operations. This is kind of like the efficiency play. How do we do what we do, but do it more efficiently? How can AI automate some of our more manual processes? How can AI be used by our employees to amplify their productivity? There are so many ways that AI can be used without ever thinking about the actual external side, to just think about how do we do what we do, but do it better. I often like to talk about like a knowledge base as being an important resource for organizations. Here at DePaul, we use SharePoint. A lot of other organizations use similar tools. How do your people interact with that knowledge base? How do they answer questions to be able to get their jobs done more effectively? AI tools can empower those types of operations. So I think these internal use cases are super important. And then when you think about the external, this is really like the holy grail of thinking about, okay, as we try and work with our customers, how do we improve the customer experience using AI? Some people, when they hear AI, they think of something that is like cold, inauthentic, or arm's length, like a robocaller, or the idea of like a phone tree where I'm calling customer service and I'm getting press 1, press 2, press 3. AI is going to disrupt all of that through natural conversation, so that now things like customer service, customer personalization, think about marketing, market segmentation, marketing personalization. All of this is going to allow organizations to meet their customers where they are at scale. If you think about old school customer experience, it was very person to person, it was very individual, helping individual, that's still this kind of like core human element. But as organizations grow and they want to reach more people, they have to figure out how to do that in a more digital world. AI can create that personal experience. Personalization in the past meant a warm smile and a friendly handshake. Personalization in this context is all about data and analytics, and how do we use that information to personalize the digital experience. And so wrapping your heads around how AI is going to develop all these external use cases for the organization. So once you have a sense of like the range of use cases, another piece that I think is super important here is starting to think about the idea of like an AI strategy. This doesn't necessarily mean a standalone strategic initiative. Many of the organizations we work with have, 4 or 5 strategic pillars or strategic initiatives that the executives and the board have crafted. That could be a 3-year plan, a 10-year plan with a 1-year sprint. There is some type of strategic thinking at every developed organization. My goal is to get organizations thinking about how does AI interact with that strategy? Is it an additional strategic initiative, or is it something that empowers your existing strategic initiatives? I think that second approach can be very useful, because then it really aligns AI with your mission, with your values. And if you think about how I think many of us approach AI today, I think it's not from a strategic perspective, but from a more tactical perspective. So many organizations who are out there having conversations with different AI vendors, having conversations with existing vendors that now offer some AI-empowered service, and they're just talking about tools. And those tools are often used at the lower levels of the organization. So maybe it's a manager or a director who says, hey, I saw this demo, I went to this conference, we should really think about trying to use this tool. Not a bad approach, but it is very tactical. It is finding a problem within the organization and thinking about a tool to solve that particular problem. I want organizations to be elevating this to the more strategic level, to think about how does AI relate to our strategic plan, and then use that to inform the tactical decisions. If you've ever read something like The Art of War, strategy defines tactics, not the other way around. And so as you think about AI adoption, you don't want the tactics driving those discussions. You want the strategy driving those discussions. So that's point one. Then if you think about how this relates to data. So I know like the next session in this series is going to be very much driven by data and analytics. I like to think from the perspective of organizational change about what does it mean to be data-driven. I think many of us now aspire to that in this world of big data and digital transformation. But if you want to become a data-driven organization, that requires leadership. This is not something that just happens. It's not just technology. It's not just having a data warehouse or a data lake. It's about how do we get the right people pushing this as an agenda across the entire organization? One of those people is somebody to be thinking about data. How do we create the right foundation? This is a core asset for every organization. Data is going to drive these types of decisions. Then you think about how do we layer analytics on our data so that we are able to derive insights from that data. I like to think of AI as the evolution of analytics. So we now have a whole business analytics program at DePaul. We have the master's program that was mentioned earlier. We have an undergraduate program. Every undergraduate business student is now required to take a course in business analytics. One of the questions I have been raising as one of the people who created that course is, what does AI mean for this type of curriculum? Because traditionally we would use Excel to produce a chart, or we would use Tableau, or we would use Power BI. More and more, we are going to see people using AI to create things like data visualization. When I taught data visualization, I leaned into ChatGPT. I had my students using these tools because that then extends their abilities to derive those insights and to communicate them more effectively. And so as you think about this progression as an organization, then the question is, okay, well, how do we lead through this type of change? How do we create a vision for the future? That's where I think CEOs need to have a voice and be part of this conversation. Too often, again, I see it down inside the organization, and the CEO just kind of delegates it and says, well, you're smart people, you're going to figure this out. And they think kind of like the thumbs up approach is what it means to kind of support AI adoption. But if this is going to be at the level of organizational change, I think it needs that voice from the very top. CEOs are the leader, they cast the vision, they point to the hill, and AI is at that level of organizational change. And so for the organizations we work with, we work very closely with the CEOs around messaging. How are they communicating to the vice presidents? How are they communicating throughout the organization to make sure that everyone understands this is not just a one-off, it's not just a new fad, this is about a new direction for the organization. But it goes well beyond CEOs. I also believe that if we are going to push AI adoption across organizations, every executive needs their own AI strategy. This is something that I feel like is somewhat unique to me in the work that I do of pushing organizations to think along these lines. Because again, most people view AI as a technology, and so they don't view it as across the executive team. They don't view it as being a shared responsibility for those executives. And so when you think about like a range of C-suite executives, most people associate with this with something like a chief information officer or chief technology officer. Again, they have a very important role to play, but they are not the only role here at the executive level. If you think about operations, like a COO, every COO needs to be thinking about how is AI either going to disrupt or transform the operations at our organization. Operational efficiency is going to be driven by AI use cases and applications. And so COOs need to be leading through that change. This could be something like automation of some manual process using an AI decision engine, but it could also be how do we get like generative AI tools in the hands of our staff so that they are more productive and they can get their work done faster. COOs need to have a voice in leading through that change. When you think about financial institutions like the ones I work with, their chief revenue engine is through lending. That's the chief loan officer. How are CLOs leading through this change? That's about like automated loan decisioning. It's about document processing. It's about how do we get to yes on a credit decision more quickly. Every CLO needs to be thinking about how this is going to change the loan origination process. Coming back to any organization, think about like retail, that customer-facing element. That could be through some type of contact center. It could be through brick and mortar. If there is any direct B2C component where you are serving the customer directly, how is that customer engaging with you, and how is AI part of that engagement? This could be through a chatbot or some other type of self-servicing. Maybe that's on your website, maybe it's on your app, maybe it's through cross-selling. A big thing that a lot of financial institutions are now doing is like a next best product so that we can make sure we are offering up these new products and services that are going to be timely and relevant to the right person. You can't identify those opportunities without some sort of data-driven AI engine. Think about finance, which is my area, like a CFO. When you think about the amount of management of like the general ledger for account reconciliation, for financial reporting, all of this is going to be transformed by AI because it's about how do we get information into more usable form. That could be a financial statement, it could be a financial report. And then how do we get that communicated throughout the organization so that people have that information in a more timely and understandable form? CFOs are thinking about all these types of issues because the CFO is really helping lead the organization in terms of budgeting and forecasting, and AI are going to be powerful tools for doing that. And then lastly, think about the role of like HR or a chief people officer. This is incredibly important as it relates to AI because 5 to 10 years ago, AI was something in the back office. And so there was only a small dedicated team, a bunch of quants who are using these types of tools. But now with generative AI, it is more of a front office thing where now you can have staff across the organization using these types of tools. And so this is where a chief people officer needs to get involved. It could be as simple as like, how do we automate more of the recruiting process? But it could also be, how do we help people get them educated, trained, and so that they are more familiar with this tool in the toolbox and they start to use it more effectively. So as you think about like a traditional org chart with an executive team, and there will be different titles across there in the C-suite, in finance with those like traditional financial service applications, what we would have been talking about a few years ago would have been, okay, AI is about machine learning, and that would have been run by like a lending department to do automated decision making on a consumer loan. As many of you know, consumer lending is largely driven by FICO scores. And then if you can start to incorporate some additional data into that, you can run that through a machine learning algorithm and you can get a credit decision quite quickly. And you don't need a person looking at all the paperwork and making that final call. They should be focused on the more complex cases where it's not black and white and you need someone to make a human judgment. But for most cases, the acceptance or denial is going to be done by machine learning. This is what AI has historically looked like in financial services. But what we are living through is this change where now instead of just machine learning, we are talking about generative AI or Gen AI. I sometimes refer to this as horizontal AI because it spans the entire organization. Instead of just being a vertical use case for a specific department, this is something that could touch any employee across the entire org chart. And so this is a different mindset. As you think about how to adopt and apply these tools, it is a very different approach. But what I find is many people still think of this as technology. And so they assume, oh, well, if we're going to do generative AI, we need to have a risk policy, super important, put those guardrails in place. But then we need to build these new tools, and that's going to be done by a vendor or by somebody working with the CIO. And so generative AI gets kind of pushed over to the side as being like a technology focus. But if you understand this as a user-facing tool, you can create the tool, you can put it in the toolbox, but that does not mean that people are going to take it out of the toolbox and use it. And so then you get into this issue of like, we've got all this really cool stuff, but we're not finding widespread adoption across the organization. That's because you need to get the people perspective engaged, which would be your HR and chief people officer. This is like the learning and development, the education, getting people excited, starting to workshops so that then you're going to have power users across the organization. How do we start to share and disseminate some of that knowledge so that it can spread more quickly? This is both CIO and CPO as you think about generative AI. And so, as I said, like this also comes back to strategy. You don't want to just think about, oh, cool new tool. Now we can do both machine learning and generative. And so let's just roll this out. And now we've like checked that box. What I want to push every organization to think about at this kind of org chart level is how do we develop more strategic thinking? You could call that AI strategy, you call it AI priorities, thinking about that from both a technology perspective, but then my personal kind of soapbox is how do we start thinking about this for every executive? So now, regardless of where you sit in the C-suite, you are thinking about how does AI apply to your part of the organization? It's not about what could we do with AI over here or over there. It's what can I do with AI as a leader, and how can I help my teams think about AI use cases within our particular domain of expertise. So then you're thinking about operational efficiency, you're thinking about lending improvement, you're thinking about financial reporting, you're thinking about hiring and talent development. Every part of the organization this is going to touch. And so you want every leader thinking strategically about how to apply AI. And we refer to that as like AI leadership alignment, getting the full executive team rowing in the same direction. So once you've got some of that strategic thinking going and you've got the team engaged and you've started to communicate with the board and you're kind of getting things aligned at the top of the house, the last piece I want to share with you is then to bring that back down and think about how does this relate back to data? Think of my presentation as sort of like the intersection of strategy and data. Because historically, when you think about data and an organization, it's often thought of in the context of business intelligence or a BI unit. This is what I find something that sits within the organization. For smaller organizations, it might be one or two analysts. For larger organizations, a whole team of analysts. And you can have data scientists, you can have some very high power people, but they are usually put together as a unit to service the organization. So they are the ones who are working with data to then provide insights back to the organization. This is how business intelligence has been done for years. And we think of this as being data-driven, but I think this model of business intelligence is broken, and I think this is going to be transformed by AI. So let me explain to you what I mean by that. So if you think about what's wrong with this model, is this unit, like a BI unit, it might sit under technology, it might sit under finance. I've seen this, or it could be under marketing, it could sit anywhere in the organization. But then you end up with this system where every other part of the organization, if there's something they want to know or understand about data, they are then sending some type of request to the business intelligence unit. It's literally almost like a help desk where you have tickets and you have backlogs. And so what you end up with is just this system where everybody who wants to know something or do something with data is now requesting it from the BI unit. Well, how do you think that goes? Very quickly, what I am seeing is that becomes this bottleneck in the organization where these people are overworked and often stressed out, and they aren't able to get to things in a timely manner. And then what happens is you just get this rising frustration because people send a request and then the business intelligence unit, let's say they produce a report, it goes back to that person and they say, well, this isn't exactly what I wanted. Can you add this field or can you split it in this way? It goes back to the BI unit and you have these emails and spreadsheets and other things going back and forth. That iteration can be so time consuming and frustrating that the ultimate problem is then people just stop asking questions. If it is hard to ask a question of the data, people become less curious and they just start relying on human judgment. That is not a data-driven organization. So how is this going to change in the age of AI? What I think we are going to see is generative AI as a data interface. Many of us, when we think about generative, we still think about ChatGPT. We think about it as a form of search for like the internet. This is like internal facing AI application. Instead of pointing at the internet, it is pointing at your data. And you could think of that holistically. It could be a knowledge base with a set of PDFs, and now I'm able to search those PDFs more effectively, like a knowledge base assistant. But if you think even quantitatively, like a core system or some other system of record for the general ledger, for customer data, for all types of transactional data, that lives inside the organization, but generative AI can be used as a tool to now interface with that data. The reason I think this is so important is because in the past, if you were a business user and you had a data question, you did not have the tool to answer that question. Well, I'm not that good at Tableau, or I don't know how to use Power BI, or Excel has all these features, but I can't remember if this is the right function or that's the right function. Now you can just type a question and generative AI will do all the coding on the back end to derive that answer from the data. And so I think what we're going to see is a centralization of data. Instead of all these pockets across the organization, I think we'll see more and more of like a data warehouse, data lake. And then this term here is a term that I believe I have coined that is unique to me, artificial business intelligence. So it is the AI version of business intelligence, or ABI. The reason I call it this is because this is the evolution of business intelligence in the age of generative AI, where now anyone can use a natural language interface, just like a ChatGPT prompt, to query the data. So what does that mean? Now anyone in the organization can become this user of data because they don't have to know how to use a data analytics software. They can use plain English to answer their own questions. And so as I wrap up here, what I am envisioning and what I am encouraging in the credit unions and other organizations I work with to envision is, where might this be headed and how might this unlock the value of your data? I now envision organizations full of data-driven power users using artificial business intelligence, that generative AI layer, so now they can self-service with their data. This is also referred to as like data democratization, or power data users, citizen developer, low code, no code. This is the evolution of all those recent trends, is going to transform the way organizations work with their data and empower their employees. So instead of a bunch of frustrated people, I think we end up with a world where people are now excited and curious because now they can ask more questions and derive more insights. So that's how strategy, data, and AI starts to all fit together. And what I just get excited about when I think about the potential for organizational transformation, the fact that I'm in my 50s and I'm still alive and I'm living through this, it's like, how do I get to be part of this wave of innovation? We've lived through personal computers, the internet, all these cool things. To me, this is like the next wave. And I think every organization, if they get this right, they can ride this wave to really enter the future in a very promising way. And so I believe the future is bright. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, there's a QR code. Would love to take some comments and questions here as we wrap up.
Wow, Dr. Black, thank you so much for that. We have a question for you, just reminding everyone on the call. We would like you to fill out a poll that we have going on. It'll show up real quick here. Dr. Black, the first question we have here is, how do you visualize data with AI while maintaining confident cybersecurity?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think the first part of that is, instead of thinking about visualization, just think about how do you use generative AI in a enterprise setting. What I have seen is that some organizations will use like an open tool, like a ChatGPT, but they put very strong guardrails around that. You have to sign a letter of consent in order to be able to access that through a work machine. But more commonly now, it's something like a Microsoft Copilot, where we are, operating in our secure environment, accessing a large language model, but we are not training that model. That's a big piece of this, is like, how do we make sure our data is not feeding back into that large language model? And there are plenty of examples of how to create those secure environments. Once you have that secure environment, then you can start to think about those applications like data visualization. So the thing I did with my students is I had them use ChatGPT to generate synthetic data so that we didn't have to worry about any confidentiality issues. And then they would use prompt engineering to come up with creative ways to then visualize that data. So there are just a lot of, once you have the secure environment, really your creativity is the only limit to be able to figure out how to use those tools.
Oh, here's something right up your alley here. Will AI interact with cryptocurrency?
Yes. So I know some folks who know me, they know crypto is also one of my passions. I think if you're familiar with the idea of like high speed trading and to be able to use capital markets and being able to use like algorithmic trading, a lot of that now is being done by AI driven machine learning models. And so for decentralized finance or DeFi, being able to trade crypto in these more kind of automated, efficient ways, I think we're going to see. And if you're familiar with the idea of a smart contract, which sits on a blockchain, instead of smart contract just being a kind of programmatic set of code, many people are figuring out how do we build AI into a smart contract. That's really the intersection of AI and blockchain.
I wanted to touch on something you mentioned earlier about CEOs and C-suite individuals or companies. When you've gone and uh, consulted these entities, what is the feeling that you get from the CEOs and the CFOs when you're telling them about this revolutionary way to look at uh, accessing or purchasing or anything dealing with AI? Are they still, like you said earlier, a little afraid of it, or are they saying, you know what, okay, let's jump in? What are you feeling when you're talking to these people?
Yeah, well, I think, the CEOs I work with are typically, they're hiring me to help them with this organizational change. So they're usually the ones that are excited about it. Sometimes there's people on their team who are a little more reluctant. So it's really about how do they get the team on board with this vision? And then I think about all the organizations who are out there who are just kind of taking a wait and see approach. Some of them like to use this term fast follower, or we're just going to wait until the dust settles. But that makes me very nervous because so much is changing so quickly that I just worry about those who are just going to put this off for a year, then they kind of get left behind and it's even harder to catch up. So to me, it's just start the conversation, get people more familiar with it, and then gradually build from there.
Well, let's see. Oh, yeah, we're right. Let's see. We might have another question here. Oh, here's one. Where can I learn more about AI and crypto?
Well, if you go to my website, I've got a few references there. I'm also a big believer in different podcasts because so much of this, there's a great book called Co-Intelligence that's on the market. You could read about AI, but more and more, it's like getting on the different podcasts and getting out there to just hear what people are developing on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis. Because to me, it's like part of what makes this so exciting is that the frontier is moving so quickly. So excited for people to check that out.
Well, Dr. Black, thank you so much for this futuristic view. A lot of people are, of course, speaking about AI, and I encourage everyone that's been on the call, please reach out to Dr. Black to ask more questions because he's definitely at the forefront of all things regarding AI. So thank you so much for joining us. And also, I just wanted to share real quick for everyone. Let's see here that please do not forget to join us on Thursday, July 17th for our last DePaul Speaker Series session of the summer entitled Gen AI Powered by Analytics Driving Business Decisions. And please access that QR code to register for it. We're definitely in line here at DePaul University when it comes to AI and the impact it has not only in the education world, but of course business. And Dr. Black definitely gave you some great food for thought indications on where we're going. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you on July 17th. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.